The modern UFO era arguably began when Franklin Delano Roosevelt served as the 32nd President of the United States of America. Known popularly as FDR, he holds the unique distinction of having been in power for more than 2 terms, from 1933 until his death in 1945. One of the most notable incidents during Roosevelt's time at the helm of affairs was what came to be widely referred to as the Battle of Los Angeles, which occurred at the height of World War II in 1942. Stretching from late in the night of February 24th into the early hours of February 25th, nervous residents of Los Angeles, California, witnessed a series of extraordinary events that entailed repeated alerts, the sounding of air raid sirens, and blackouts. All this hectic activity culminated in a barrage of anti-aircraft artillery fired against what was presumed to be a daring aerial attack mounted on the continental United States by Imperial Japan. The Americans had entered World War II barely 3 months earlier on December 7, 1941, in response to the Japanese Navy's attack on Pearl Harbor, the United States Navy base situated in Hawaii. Highly trusted and well-respected throughout the United States, FDR, who had shattered tradition to take oath of office as the president for an unprecedented 3rd term, was committed to guide the nation with a resolute hand at that most crucial juncture, just as he had worked to renew the American economy during the Great Depression. Here are excerpts of the stirring infamy speech declaring war on Japan that President Roosevelt delivered to a joint session of Congress and the nation on December 8th.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. The attack yesterday on the Hawaiian Islands has caused severe damage to American naval and military forces. I regret to tell you that very many American lives have been lost. As Commander-in-Chief of the Army and Navy, I have directed that all measures be taken for our defense, but always will our whole nation remember the character of the onslaught against us. No matter how long it may take us to overcome this premeditated invasion, the American people in their righteous might will win through to absolute victory. That since the unprovoked and dastardly attack by Japan on Sunday, December 7th, 1941, a state of war has existed between the United States and the Japanese Empire.
Given Japanese aggression and the resultant widespread paranoia prevalent amongst the public, the Battle of Los Angeles could not have transpired at a worse time. The countdown to the event began on the evening of February 23, 1942, shortly after residents in the vicinity of Elwood oil fields had settled down to hear FDR deliver his fireside chat that would update them on the war. They learnt of artillery fire coming from a Japanese I-17 submarine located a mile off the coast. The submarine had surfaced stealthily near Santa Barbara, California, and fired armor-piercing shells at the Elwood oil field. Though the damage caused by the bombardment was minimal, the act profoundly affected public psyche, not only in the region that suffered but across the U.S., as reports of the attack were splashed on the front page of newspapers the following morning. Now in the severe grip of fear, West Coast residents firmly believed a Japanese invasion was imminent. Against this chilling backdrop, on February 24th, the Office of Naval Intelligence issued a warning that an attack on mainland California could be expected within the next 10 hours. This propelled the military, civilians, and personnel manning the coastal batteries into a state of high alert. Only a little over 3 years earlier, in October 1938, had scores of Americans been tossed into great panic by a Halloween radio broadcast based on an adaptation of the famous novel The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells. The convincing narration and realistic performance of that work of science fiction by Orson Welles led thousands of horrified listeners into thinking a Martian invasion was underway, resulting in considerable mayhem.
We interrupt our program of dance music to bring you a special bulletin from the Intercontinental Radio News.
Ladies and gentlemen, I have a grave announcement to make. Incredible as it may seem, both the observations of science and the evidence of our eyes lead to the inescapable assumption that those strange beings who landed in the Jersey farmlands tonight are the vanguard of an invading army from the planet Mars.
I'm speaking from the roof of Broadcasting Building, New York City. The bells you hear are ringing to warn the people to evacuate the city as Martians approach.
Our board lit up when they announced that the Martians were coming across the George Washington Bridge. And that's when the excitement started.
Some people said, did I have a chance to see them? What were they like? What did they look like?
I figured them little peoples. I don't mean foot tall. Little peoples, green in color with a flowing hood.
Martian cylinders are crawling all over the country. At least 40 people, including 6 state troopers, lie dead in a field east of the village of Grover's Mill.
They were crying and screaming and wanting to know if there was a lot of gas, if there was a lot of destruction, were there fires, is there a lot of shooting, are there bodies all around?
But people believed it. They really believed it that night. And I think of the ones who were begging us to get connections to their families, to their husbands, to mothers and fathers before the world came to an end, so they could just tell them they loved them.
This, despite 4 announcements that were made during the broadcast explaining it was a dramatized work. However, following outrage expressed in the media, 23-year-old Orson Welles apologized to the country in a hastily called press conference the very next morning.
Americans gathered around their radios were fooled, frightened, even panicked by what they heard.
Orson Welles had shaken the country without knowing it was possible.
A mythical invasion by monsters from the planet Mars should have had so profound an effect upon radio listeners.
So, did the U.S. witness similar public hysteria in the face of the Japanese assault at California in the final months of World War II? Let's find out. With Californians on the edge, the tense day that was February 24th progressed into the uncertain evening. Flares and blinking lights were reported in the skies, particularly from the vicinity of defense plants. Alerts were called and lifted. No radio stations could broadcast. until finally, air raid sirens were sounded and a blackout was ordered in Los Angeles County at 2:25 a.m. Simultaneously, thousands of air raid wardens were summoned to their positions, and the action got underway just after 3 a.m. As reported in the press later, LA erupted like a volcano. The 37th Coast Artillery Brigade began firing their machine guns and anti-aircraft shells into the air, apparently at no specific target. By 4:15, over 1,400 anti-aircraft shells were fired before the all clear was sounded and the blackout order was lifted at 7:21 a.m. on February 25th.
And now for news of our own West Coast, we take you to Los Angeles and the report of Byron Palmer.
Anti-aircraft guns went into action against unidentified aircraft in the Los Angeles area shortly after 3 a.m. Pacific wartime this morning. The anti-aircraft guns began barking during a blackout ordered by the 4th Interceptor Command at 2:25 a.m. The unidentified object, which some sources thought might be a blimp, moved slowly down the Pacific coast from Santa Monica and disappeared south of Long Beach. Army officials declined to comment on the possibility that the object might have been a blimp. Shells frequently could be seen bursting near the object, but none appeared to hit it.
In the aftermath, it was estimated that many buildings and vehicles had sustained damage from U.S. military shell fragments. With the death toll of civilians numbered at 5, 3 of whom lost their lives in car accidents in the incredible chaos that prevailed, and 2 who succumbed to heart attacks attributed to the intense stress the frightening event had caused. A larger casualty count was doubtless prevented thanks to air raid precautions imparted on a war footing to the populace all over the U.S. in the days and weeks following the Pearl Harbor attack.
Be calm. 2, get under shelter. 3, don't run. Obey your air raid warden.
To allay fears among the jittery citizenry, a few hours later, Secretary of the Navy, Frank Knox, held a press conference. He concluded the entire incident had been a false alarm due to anxiety and war nerves. With that statement, the initial exultation among the public who believed an air raid by the Japanese had been successfully thwarted turned to embarrassment, which was quickly replaced by outrage. "Whose nerves, Mr. Knox?" asked the editorial of Los Angeles Times. "The public's or the Army's?" For its part, the Army, via the Secretary of War, Henry L. Stimson, claimed that the incident might have been orchestrated by enemy agents using commercial airplanes in a psychological warfare campaign to generate mass panic. He later retreated from this observation. Despite all these explanations and assurances, conflicting as they were, something didn't quite add up. The press and public couldn't place a finger on what the government was seemingly hiding. After all, there were no reports of airplanes having been shot down on that dreadful night. What then was the 5-hour blackout ordered by the Army's 4th Interceptor Command and the subsequent pandemonium for? In fact, owing to the innumerable blackouts Los Angeles was subjected to, the LA Times nicknamed it the City of Shadows. These suspicions remained, and the mystery only deepened further when, after the end of the war in 1945, the Japanese government categorically denied having flown aircraft over Los Angeles on the night in question. Yet, no one could explain radar stations picking up a UFO at 1:44 a.m. that night and then tracking it to within 5 kilometers of Los Angeles before it vanished. In a 1949 report on the perplexing incident, the United States Coast Artillery Association identified meteorological balloons sent aloft at 1 a.m. on February 25th as having started all the shooting. Revealing that such balloons carried lights for tracking purposes, the association also explained that shell bursts illuminated by searchlights were mistaken by ground crews for enemy aircraft, and that, once the firing started, imagination created all kinds of targets in the sky and everyone joined in. The U.S. Office of Air Force History offered virtually the same assessment in 1983, attributing the event to a case of war nerves triggered by a lost weather balloon, which was exacerbated by stray flares and shell bursts from adjoining batteries. However, if the official version is taken at face value, it boggles the mind to think how a humble weather balloon withstood the barrage of artillery shelling. But even back in 1942, few Angelenos gave credence to the weather balloon story because a stunning photograph published in the Los Angeles Times on February 26th showed searchlights illuminating a strange-looking object. Though it unmistakably resembles a classic domed flying saucer, this conclusion was arrived at retrospectively by UFO investigators, because the concept of alien aerial vehicles was unknown then. Poring over declassified documents after World War II ended, ufologists learned that the Army had conducted an investigation after the blackout had been lifted. Gathering information from military personnel and civilians alike, they had pieced together what had probably transpired. Considering this, speculation about an extraterrestrial visitation on that mysterious night in 1942 persists down to this day. But critics, though, debunk such notions and call attention to the fact that prior to publication, the alleged flying disc photograph was heavily modified to improve contrast in black and white images, as was the practice in that era. Yet despite sounding heroic, the Battle of Los Angeles, or the Great Los Angeles Air Raid, are in fact derisive terms coined by sections of the media and observers. For in their opinion, the remarkable event exposed the lack of military preparedness to combat such threats. There are varied eyewitness accounts of what transpired after the blackout was declared in Los Angeles County at 2:25 a.m. on Wednesday, February 25, 1942. Nearly 1 million Southern Californians were jolted out of their slumber by the familiar yet dreaded air raid sirens, which was followed by the deafening sounds of artillery shelling unlike anything they had ever experienced before. Stunned residents were certain they were under attack by the Japanese Air Force. This intense fear led to later news reports that quoted eyewitnesses variously. Some claimed to have seen up to 200 bombers and planes on that night, dropping bombs. Others swore they saw numerous airplanes, but couldn't tell if they belonged to the U.S. or the Japanese. Then there were claims of at least 2 planes having been shot down. Ultimately, these statements weren't conclusively proven or were otherwise inaccurate. However, a distinct section of eyewitnesses had an entirely different and chilling story to narrate about the airborne marauder that was caught in powerful searchlight beams over the Santa Monica Mountains on that ominous night. While some of the following accounts became public knowledge in the days immediately after the LA air battle, a few surfaced years later. Among the section of Angelenos who braved the commotion and stepped out of their homes, those who drove back home frantically, and people guarding farms and fields, many reported sighting an unusual aerial vehicle. Depending on the distance between the eyewitness and the UFO, some claimed the glowing craft was about 800 feet in length and shaped like a lozenge or a blimp. Others stated they only saw a blob of light. On February 26, 1942, the Reno Evening Gazette published a news report with further vivid descriptions of the unidentified craft. The article revealed several Angelenos saw something that looked like a giant butterfly, with the object displaying a slight hump in the middle and curved down at the edges. This enormous dark craft dropped altitude abruptly, slowed down, sped up, and displayed the capability to avoid radar detection. Even though massive confusion prevailed, insofar as witnesses being unable to conclusively discern the true shape of the UFO, the one thing common to descriptions given by those who claimed to have seen the gigantic object directly overhead was that it did not make a sound as it glided majestically across the night sky out over the ocean. Residents recalled that the aerial vehicle blocked out a portion of the night sky and most of the stars, and because of its length, took forever to pass over. Interestingly, eyewitnesses also recounted that the UFO caused a slight vibrational hum. Yet, the Air Force, which wasn't a separate entity in 1942, but was under the Army umbrella, dismissed all claims of UFO sightings. It was assumed to be the end of this remarkable episode. Military investigators gathered details of the terrifying and confounding nocturnal incident over Los Angeles and handed their report up the chain of command to Henry Stimson and U.S. Army Chief of Staff George C. Marshall. In a purported classified memo that's deemed unauthentic in some quarters, Marshall allegedly informed FDR about the true nature of the LA incident. The details, if true, are jaw-dropping. The Marshall memo speaks of the recovery of 2 alien craft, one off the coast of California and another in the San Bernardino Mountains. Marshall explained that the recovered objects didn't resemble any conventional aircraft, going so far as to declare that according to intelligence sources, they are in all probability of interplanetary origin. Could this mean an alien craft or crafts were shot down on that fateful night, away from the glare of cameras and anxious citizens in Los Angeles? Did Roosevelt keep this information secret for reasons of national security? In a classified memo written barely 2 days after the Battle of Los Angeles, President Roosevelt spoke of atomic secrets learned from study of celestial devices and non-human material in the possession of the Army that may be of great significance toward the development of a superweapon of war. Even more shocking are the contents of the double-top secret memo penned by the President in February 1944, 2 whole years after the nocturnal scare over Los Angeles. Addressed to a hitherto unknown Special Committee on Non-Terrestrial Science and Technology, Roosevelt states, "Non-terrestrial know-how in atomic energy must be used in perfecting superweapons of war to effect the complete defeat of Germany and Japan," adding that the U.S. military should take every advantage of such wonders that have come to us. And as though that wasn't astonishing enough, Roosevelt admitted that we should acknowledge the reality that the Earth is not the only planet harboring intelligent life in the universe. Based on their means of acquisition, leading UFO investigator Richard Dolan believes these documents are legitimate. Nonetheless, Roosevelt's observations gain immense significance because as the Commander-in-Chief of the United States, he made them mere months before the detonation of the first atomic bomb in July 1945. UFO researchers point out that the FDR administration took the whole extraterrestrial phenomenon seriously and classified the subject above even the atomic bomb, which explains why the interplanetary origin of the flying disc sighted above LA became a closely guarded secret. In the concluding episode of this two-part series, we'll gain insights into Franklin Roosevelt's role in steering the United States towards victory in World War II and analyze his response to a baffling phenomenon called Foo Fighters.